Welcome to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. In this episode, I'm joined by Craig Hamilton. After working as an underground coal miner for 16 years, Craig started his career as a sports broadcaster with Australia's ABC Radio in 1994, commentating on rugby league, rugby union and cricket. He's also played cricket for New South Wales country at an international level. Craig's also battled a serious mental illness, and he's going to share his experiences with us today. So welcome, Craig.
Hi, how are you, Philip?
Good, thank you. Good, thanks, Craig. So perhaps start by telling us more about your very varied and interesting career.
Well, I've had a number of careers, actually, in my life. I haven't been someone who's been employed doing the one job from the time I left school. I grew up on a dairy farm in Singleton, in the Hunter Valley in New South Wales, and Dad was a dairy farmer. And so I worked on the farm with him for a number of years up until probably my late teens, finished school, and then the first job I applied for was a trainee deputy in an underground coal mine. So it was a big culture shock to go from a farm to a mine. And I worked in the mine for 16 years. I was underground for 16 years, coal mining in Newcastle. And probably 3 or 4 years before I left the mines, I had an opportunity to do some radio, just some casual radio, some volunteer radio, and loved it. And for somebody who always loved sport, I always loved, cricket was my game of choice, but I love rugby union as well, and played a little bit of rugby league at school, but just loved sport. And so there was a chance to do a bit of radio, and I did that for a number of years, and then finally decided, look, I want to make this a career. An opportunity came up, and I applied for the job in radio with the ABC and got the job, and did that for the next 25 years, working on the National Rugby League as a commentator, and had my own program in Newcastle and presented all the programs on the radio station, and only left in the last 12 months to go into what I do now, which is full-time mental health speaking.
So you're covering lots of large-scale, international sporting events, when you were on the radio. And were there any signs, or did you see any kind of symptoms of what you now know to be bipolar disorder?
Well, the interesting thing with that is that when you have the benefit of hindsight, it literally is 20/20 vision. You can look back and go, well, yeah, those signs are there, those highs, the peaks and troughs of a bipolar mood disorder, where you've got, escalating highs and crippling lows and depressions, which you have nothing to compare it to because it's the only life you know. You can look back and go, yeah, those mood swings were definitely there, and they were definitely part of my life. But it wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I experienced my first serious, what I would call really serious depression. And that lasted for about 7 or 8 months. And I required time off work with that. I required medication to try and turn that around. And then I recovered, but it was a false dawn. I recovered after 5 weeks of taking antidepressant medication. And then I had an escalating mood, or had a manic episode, and then a psychotic episode. Just before the Sydney Olympic in 2000, I was actually on my way to work at the Sydney Olympics for the ABC as a broadcaster. I was on the train station. So I was pretty close to actually being in Sydney for the, 2 or 3 days before the start of the Olympic. And I had this psychotic episode, which anyone who's experienced a psychotic episode before, they're terrifying. And you lose your grip on reality, and you're just basically having a massive meltdown, a massive mental breakout. And I ended up in a psych hospital, and I was in there for 14 days while the Olympics were on. And that's when I was first diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So that's what it took to get a to get the correct diagnosis. And so life changed from that point on, and that's 24 years ago.
And can you describe, for those people that don't really know, how would you describe what happens to you during a manic episode? How are you feeling?
Well, it's easy to describe a depressed mood and what that's like to experience depression, because for those who have experienced depression, well, for me is, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I had acute anxiety, negative thoughts, stress levels through the roof, couldn't concentrate. I was despairing I was going to get better. You were just in a terrible place, completely exhausted all the time. And at the back end of 2000, suicidal. I was so severely depressed. So that's how serious depression can get. But for someone who's experiencing mania, you feel, I call it better than well. You feel 10 foot tall, bulletproof, euphoric. You feel you have energy that you simply couldn't burn. You're able to multitask, think all sorts of, have all sorts of plans, execute them quite well. And that can happen when you're manic. And I think there's a fairly long history of recorded of creative people who have produced some amazing work when they've been in that manic phase, and then when they drop back into that depressed phase, which might last for 6 or 12 months, they don't do anything. So that, that's the classic bipolar. But so if you keep going through that mania, and it's not addressed, and you don't ground yourself or have beyond medication that prevents you from becoming manic, you can become psychotic. And that's, scary. You lose your grip on reality. You're delusional, and verbally aggressive was how it played out for me. That verbally aggressive, and that's when it became a police matter. I actually got picked up by the police on the station because I'd become such a problem. So, but they knew straight away that what they were witnessing was a mental health crisis. It wasn't it wasn't a criminal problem. It was a mental health crisis, and that's why they didn't take me to the police station. It took me straight to a psychiatric hospital, and I got the help that I needed.
So is that when you got the diagnosis, the bipolar disorder diagnosis?
Yeah. That was what they needed to know, because there's no blood tests for bipolar. It's diagnosed through the observance of mood swing. So you see somebody who for months might be euphorically high and happy and energetic and gregarious and outgoing and risk-taking behaviours, to someone who is curled up in the fetal position. If you witness that, then you may well be witnessing someone who has a mood disorder or a bipolar disorder. So that's once the doctors at the hospital where I was taken were made aware that, look, this guy's been depressed for 7 months. He's only just been put on antidepressant medication in the last 5 weeks. And then he started to improve. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, he's not sleeping, and he's got all the energy in the world, which he can't burn. Physical training twice a day, and have a whole heap of great ideas. Then that's the beginning and the observance of a manic episode.
How did you respond to that diagnosis? Was it, in a strange way, was it a kind of relief to know that you could name it?
Well, eventually it was, but for the first 3 months I didn't believe that I was bipolar. I refused to believe that I had a mental illness. I was in total denial, even though the evidence was quite clear, irrefutable evidence based on what had taken place in the previous 8 months, to say that, no, you actually do have a mental illness, and that's how it's played out. So it probably took 2 or 3 months, and then I accepted the diagnosis. And to know, and I say this to anybody who thinks that there may be a bipolar mood disorder at play, either with them or with someone else in their family, their friends, work colleagues, to actually have a diagnosis and to know what you're dealing with is a beautiful thing, because your life changes the moment you know what you're actually dealing with, and you can go about recovery, management, healing, and living a bloody great life again. It's when you don't know and you're totally in the dark with it, which a lot of people are. They think these mood swings are just part of the deal. But if the mood swings are severe enough over a long enough period of time, it'll leave a train wreck behind you, because it's just, everything in life becomes problematic, from your career to your friendships to all relationships to your family. Everything becomes problematic with an undiagnosed and untreated bipolar disorder. So the moment you know and you go, yep, okay, this is mine, I accept this diagnosis, the diagnosis is right, what are we going to do about it?
And why do you think you were in denial for those first 3 months when you were first diagnosed?
Well, I think a big part of it is the fact that it's very much a men's thing. We don't want to show vulnerability. We don't want to share the fact that we might have had a breakdown. We don't want to admit to mental health problems because of the stigma associated with mental health problems. And we're men. I mean, this is we're designed, brought up to, conditioned to be tough, strong, resilient, and the ones who sort their own problems. Has been a counterproductive for centuries, and I'm over it. And in the work I've been doing for the, I've been an advocate and a speaker and an author, and someone who's been in the media talking about this stuff now for 20 years. I've been well and truly over it for a long time, and I have no embarrassment whatsoever about my story, my background, what happened. I just want to make a difference for the next person. I got myself well. I've been well for a long time, and it's been an interesting ride to get to that point. To get to be at that point. But to answer your question, that's why we don't want to know, because it's a bit too hard for a lot of us to admit there's a problem. We don't want to have a problem. We certainly don't want to have a mental health problem.
So we'll talk about the promise in a minute, but before that, could you just talk us, so over a long period of time, just explain that recovery process? What did that look like, and what were the elements that went into that recovery?
Well, I'll preface that by saying we're all still recovering. We're all healing our stuff, our traumas, our hurts, our psychological wounds, if you like. It's a process, and we do that. I believe we do that from the time we're born till the time we die. That's part of being human. But for something as dramatic as this, and it was dramatic. I mean, I've written, as you know, Philip, a couple of books on this, and my first book is very confronting, and it's very, it was very traumatic. The breakdown at the railway station. That's where the book started. But to get better from that, I knew when you have a breakdown of that magnitude, something's got to change, and change is the word. Change is the word. I had to be absolutely honest, have a walk in the House of Mirrors and have a good look at myself and be honest and say, right, I need to make some changes here to the way I'm living, and do a bit of an audit, a self-audit, because it wasn't simply a case of taking medication. I knew there had to be more to recovery and to healing and to managing and staying well than just taking a pill. And that proved to be the case. I I started to educate myself around bipolar disorder. I read books, I watched documentaries, and I saw people interviewed about their own experiences with bipolar, what worked for them, what didn't work for them. I looked at my diet. I looked at what my hydration levels were. I looked at the amount of exercise I was doing, how much sleep I was getting, how was I managing my stress. I learned to do things like yoga. I learned some meditation skills. I became more aware of how much work I was doing, how much time I was spending doing work, and just changed the whole game, really. Changed, and that was at the age of 37. I thought I've got to do a complete recalibration here, and so that's what I did.
And then that brings you to today then, and you've been managing that ever since. Do you know anything about the causes? I mean, is it chemical? Is it, what would be the causes of, developing a bipolar condition, or are you born with it?
It's a really good question. My view is the jury is still out. What I think, based on what I've read and in my study of this subject, because, when you are the person who has bipolar, certainly for me, I've got a very inquiring mind. I want to find out the best way to remain well. So, my mother was diagnosed with bipolar disorder after I was. So she was in her late 60s when she was diagnosed. And she was diagnosed. My mother had mental health problems all her life. I don't remember Mum ever really being well. But as kids, I'm 60 now. I'm 61 years of age. In the 1960s, growing up, it was certainly, we had a saying in Australia, if there was if someone, if your mother had some mental health problems, that was never mentioned. It was just go and take a Bex and have a good lie down. It was Bex powders, which were the sedatives, powdered form Valium or whatever, just have one of those and go and lie down. So it's, so therefore the element of a genetic component is certainly strong there, I think. And, but I also believe there's a nurture, there's a nurture side of this as well. And this comes back to, trauma and childhood trauma. And if you listen to the work of Gabor Mate from Canada, Canadian doctor, who's now in his 80s, he talks about his own childhood trauma and the impact that it's had on him. His parents were prisoner of war in Second World War in Hungary, I think. And so he grew up as 1, 2, 3, 4 years of age in with a terribly stressful, abnormal childhood. My trauma, and this is where I think this is where it gets interesting, is my trauma, I think, was the fact there was no bonding there between my mother and myself because of her mental health issues herself. And there's no blame here, it just is. And I think wherever there's a trauma involved, yes, you've got your genetic component to something like this, but I also believe there's a trauma component that is there, maybe ready to in later life, given the right stressors, to just go bang and visit it upon yourself.
That's really interesting. Should we come to the present day then and talk about The Promise, which is a project you've been working on? I wonder if you could just tell us a bit about it and more importantly, why.
Well, The Promise is a documentary, and it was made in Australia in 2023, so last year. It's my story. It features my story and the You know, how someone who's got a very normal Australian upbringing, who's, you know, has a successful career, has done pretty well in his education, has a great network of friends, has a great family, married, 3 children, and no money problems. So nothing in life that could possibly be viewed as a problem. So that was me. I was that bloke. I was that person at 37, and then the wheels just fell off, and this thing called bipolar has come hurtling out of the night sky and just visited upon our family. So it's about that. The documentary's about that, and how it impacts on you, and how devastating depression can be, and how deadly depression can be, because I talk about in quite detail the suicidal thinking that I had, the suicidal ideation I had at the depths of the depression that I experienced. But also in this documentary, we meet 4 other people who are interviewed about their stories and their battles with bipolar and with depression, with postnatal depression in one case. They're interviewed, so they're part of the rich fabric of this documentary. And then at the end, we have 4 very powerful stories from 4 families who have all lost a family member to suicide, and the impact that it had on them and how it played out, and their call to action. And that's what this documentary is. It's a call to action. And that's what the promise is. And at the end of the documentary, I say to, it's the last image you'll see on the screen, I make the promise that if I ever get to that point again, so low with depression again, I make the promise that I will call you and you will know. I make that promise to you, and the same the other way. You make the promise to me that if you ever get to that situation when you're desperate, that before anything else happens, before it gets any worse, you pick up the phone and you make that call. And it's an agent for change, this documentary. It's confronting, it's difficult to watch, and that's come from a lot of people, but at the same time, we believe it's a game changer, and it's definitely needed in this space. At this, as we speak, Philip, we can't see it in the UK. It's only available on Stan Australia at the moment, so it's available Australia-wide. But if there's anyone listening to your podcast today that would like to sign the film to the UK, we've talked to a few places over there, including the BBC, but we haven't got a nibble yet to put it on. But it goes for an hour, and if there's anyone interested in the subject, then please let them get in touch with you, and you can get in touch with me.
Will do. In fact, we have more people listening in the US, so same call out there. Yeah.
Look, we'd love to see. We've had some discussions with the US as well, but yes, no nibbles as we speak.
So is that the heart of it? Is that the crux of it, that men are still, well, this applies to anyone, I guess, with suicidal thoughts, are just not speaking to anyone. They're just suffering in silence. Is that the main point?
Yeah, that is. That's it. That's it in a nutshell. Men and women experience depressed mood, suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, as often as men do. I think that's demonstrably true, well, anecdotally true. The problem is that women generally speak about these things to their friends and to their families, and they don't suffer in silence as much as men. We are our own worst enemies. The suicide rates in Australia, there are more than double the number of people in Australia die by suicide than die in road accidents in Australia every year. More than double. It's a huge number. It's a staggering number of people. And that doesn't count those who attempt suicide and survive. It doesn't count those who who think about suicide and never act upon it. So we're talking a big thing here. And the stats, when they're really crystallised and condensed and brought down to the pointy end, 9 Australians on average take their lives every day. 9. 7 of those are men. So the vast majority who are taking their life are men, of those who make an attempt on their lives. And that says 2 things to me. One, we as men don't share our feelings and ask for help as readily as women do. And the other thing is we have a propensity to have access and a capacity to create a situation for a more violent death than women. I think there's a factor in that as well.
Is that horrific number? Is that increasing?
It's been look, I think it's been pretty steady as a suicide rate. It's certainly not coming down. I don't think it's going up, but it's not coming down either. And that's one of the things, the real goals of this documentary, because it's a multi-layered documentary that we've made. But one of the first things we set out to do when I sat down with Jai Curry from Green Frog Productions, who directed The Promise, I said, mate, let's make this a suicide prevention documentary. And so that's a big task to set yourself. That's a high bar to say, yeah, we're going to make a documentary and it's going to be a suicide prevention documentary. But I think with the theme of The Promise, that's the commitment. You're actually asking someone, right, I'm going to do this when I'm well. You don't wait until you're unwell to make a promise. You do it when you're well and you're feeling 100%, and you say, well, gee, just watched that documentary and it really shook me up and opened my eyes about how serious depression can get. So what I'm going to do now is I don't ever think I'll be in that place. I don't ever see myself being there, but I'm going to make you the promise anyway that if I am, I'll ring you. And that's what we want, a real consciousness shift into a course of action. Take action rather than just waiting for this dirty black dog to chase you down. As Winston Churchill called it, the black dog. It's called the black dog here in Australia as well. And, don't wait for the dog, just tell your friends, as soon as I see the dog, I'm going to call you and tell you there's a dog down on the corner.
That's clever. That's a clever idea to have that takeaway, that kind of device almost, which is The Promise, because, you've got something and then you can take that away from having watched this whole film. So, Craig, if, people listening to this, if some of this is resonating with them, or perhaps they're thinking, actually, I recognize some of those symptoms in my partner, my brother, my colleague, my sister, what would you say they should perhaps do?
That question gets asked at every function that I speak at. I take questions after I do my speaking presentations, and I've spoken around Australia. I think I've probably done 400 or 500 keynote presentations, and whenever questions are asked, that is the one question that is universally asked, and that is, what should I do if I see this in myself or in someone else? Then what I would say, if you're listening to this and you can see you're resonating with some of these signs and these symptoms, then definitely go and talk to somebody. Go and see your GP, a general practitioner. Go and see your doctor, or speak to a psychologist, or, maybe book an appointment and go straight and see a psychiatrist and say, these are my symptoms. And don't be frightened of doing it. Because if you're suffering, if you suffer enough, eventually, I say it's one of the great tools. The beautiful thing about suffering, and this will sound ridiculous to say that, but the beautiful thing about suffering, it actually forces us, challenges us to do something, to change the situation. So action is the cry. So if you sense those symptoms, go and talk to someone about them. And if you're already, diagnosed with a depression or a bipolar, there is so much information out there now. I've got 2 great books. Buy those. Just jump on my website. There's a quick plug. And for anyone else, I believe it's a one-on-one conversation. It is not for a group conversation, because if you're concerned about somebody, just grab them one-on-one and say, look, I'm just checking in to see how you're going. You seem like you're a bit flat. You aren't your normal bubbly self. Are you okay? Is everything okay at home? Is everything okay at work? Because, I'm here. I'll just listen. If you want to tell me I'm just a bit concerned about you, is everything all right? Simple as that. That may open the door to a further conversation. You might actually be surprised that they're ready to talk. There's no guarantees with that, though. That door might be quickly slammed shut with I'm fine, thanks very much. But if you are concerned, you're better off to ask how someone is and at least give them an opportunity to say, yeah, I'm struggling. And then if they say they are, or they say they're really depressed, or say, yeah, I'm suicidal, then be prepared for that. And just say, well, what are we going to do about it? What do you want to do about it? Because there's plenty of things we can do about it, but we need to get some help, and I'll point you in the right direction. We are not doctors. I am not a psychologist. I am not a psychiatrist. But the number of times in the last 20 years I have pointed people in the right direction to get some help, it's been too many to count. But that's how I deal with it. I don't, my books are there now as a resource. My documentary's there as a resource. I've been interviewed 1,000 times on podcasts and on yours tonight, TV interviews. They're all up and available there. So if there's anything tonight in our discussion, Philip, that is, you find valuable, or anyone listening that finds valuable, I'm pretty easily accessible.
Thank you, Craig. That's fantastic, and we'll put those links in the podcast description. Thank you for being so honest and open, and I really think these sorts of discussions are necessary. They're sometimes uncomfortable, but hopefully, they're going to hit the mark, and we'll make some differences. And your film, you said it's only available in Australia, but we'll put details on how to watch that as well.
Thank you. My story is a great story. My story is a survival story, and it's a story of hope. So for anybody who's going through this stuff at the moment, you can and will come out the other side of it, and there are better days ahead, believe me.
Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. As per Craig's advice, if you're worried about your mental health, then do contact your GP, your doctor. You can find out more about Craig's story and his books and his speaking work by visiting his website, craig-hamilton.com. Craig's film, The Promise, documents his journey of resilience and transformation, and also shares the stories of suicide survivors and the families who have suffered the loss of loved ones. It's available to stream on Stan, however, only if you're in Australia. You can watch the trailer on YouTube if you search for The Promise, Craig Hamilton, and the link is in the episode description. If you have a story to tell and you think your experience would help others, then please get in contact, either through the website, mid-lifemen.com, or email me at midlifemen01@gmail.com. Finally, please share the podcast with people you know and with your networks, and we can reach more people who might benefit from the stories shared by my guests.